Sorry that not everyone got to participate, but I did throw some comments in. Um, and so I want to say, does anybody have any burning questions that came up? Yes?
Are you talking about burning?
I might.
Well, I live up outside of Ukiah, and I just moved to this property a couple months ago, and have had many wonderful wanders in the old West Oak community and as well.
So a burnout, a hollow tree that's been burned out, that's probably from catastrophic fire. Um, the the trees that have big bulbous bases, where the trunk just all of a sudden at the ground is like rounded and almost like madrones and stuff, that's probably controlled burn or a low intensity burn. So you can kind of read fire history. And then if you cut Douglas firs to use for building and things, you can often look at the tree rings. And you can see fire scars in the tree rings. If you know how to read it, you can see where the tubes have been overheated when a fire went by. So most of the controlled burning that was done by native peoples was fast. It moved through. And there was very little smoke. It just moved right through. So on my landscape, they found to build a big house, they had to remove a large old cedar stump, and they slabbed it. They cross-slabbed it, and the scientists looked at it, and they could see that up until 200 years ago, when the indigenous people were removed with prejudice, there was every 3 to 5 years. So this is very important information in Northern California, maybe the entire West Coast, okay? That regular burning is on a 3 to 5 year periodicity. And regular wildfire is on a 20-year periodicity. So these are very important facts to know, right? Or actually observations to know, is the periodicity, because there's recovery. Now, a hot fire, a catastrophic fire, or a wildfire can cook the ground. It can overheat the ground. But a cool fire, which is what I'm teaching people to use, stays in the air almost. It stays above the soil, and it moves through the fine fuels, grasses, twigs, and it moves through those fuels pretty quickly. And it reduces those fine fuels to, I call it a biochar lace. It almost looks like fishnet stocking, okay? And it's like hung in the air on the stubs of the bunch grasses, and it just quickly disintegrates. But it's a moment of wonder. And I'm just going to talking about fire a little bit here and go on. There's so much to learn. So the time of year that was regularly burnt by fire in the Northwest was our fire season. It was August, September is when they burnt. And you can imagine we can't get away with that anymore. So think about a landscape that has been regularly burnt. Then there wouldn't be such a fuel load, and you could light a fire and it wouldn't go catastrophic. But we're in a situation where catastrophic is what's going to happen. And so we really, to reintroduce fire on your landscape or even think about it, the first thing you need to do is this. And this is a pole saw, Japanese logging saw. This is a smaller one, they come bigger. And what part of social forestry is very seldom using chainsaws, because chainsaws, you can't hear each other, it's not social. The animals run away instead of coming to see what kind of messes you're making. And there's a guy out of New Zealand, I think, using a Japanese saw like this. There's a logging contest where you stand on a log and you cut through the log until you fall. So it's up in the air, and you're up in the air, and you cut through this log. He'll beat any chainsaw ever made with a hand saw. with this handsaw. Now he can't do that all day, right?
You
But
mean in
these,
terms of how long it takes?
huh?
How long it takes?
Yeah, how long it takes. So here's somebody with a fancy chainsaw doing this, and he's on a handsaw. He wins. So, you know, I just want to point out that machines are a joke. I mean, they just selling this shit to us, and really it's hand tools and knowledge and skill that's going to help. So, a tremendous amount of work needs to be done before you can reintroduce fire on your landscape. And then, at this point, the only time of year we're going to be able to burn is in the middle of winter after the ground's wet, but during a dry spell when the fine fuels dry out enough that we can burn. So that's how we're going to have to practice burning right now, because we're going to have to do it in January and in December.
But I understood why we have to do it then.
Yes.
Don't we then miss out on one of the huge benefits of the early autumn, late summer burn, which is treating the seed that's in the grass?
Not, yes, breaking dormancy of seeds. Yes. More than that, we knock out the lizards and stuff. They can't run away as fast. In the fall, the animals are still ready to run. But in the middle of winter, they're hibernating. So that's why the cool burning, I mean, we need to practice, right? And we're still doing something good. We're helping, we're reducing fuel, we are recycling nutrients. But first you need to go through and kind of look to see if there are any big alligator lizards or that, and then get ready to, you know, move it quickly. But cool burning, you know, it's a little less dangerous for the animals and stuff. But a lot of the benefits are still taken. The smoke goes up into the trees, that affects the leaves and the bark, and so it still is good. And in the meantime, the social forestry we have to do is learning to use this abundance. I mean, we are surrounded by insurmountable opportunities. I mean, that's one of my favorite permaculture principles. We are surrounded by insurmountable opportunities. Good luck, you know? What? Do you sleep at night? What's your problem? You're sleeping at night? Come on! I mean, there's things to do. So there's a tremendous amount of social forestry, which is traditional woodcrafting or bushcraft. And boy, is there a lot to learn. Baskets, turning wood, making good digging sticks, fire hardening. This is a hardened tip, fire hardened. Now this is an old one, so it's worn off. Oh, you didn't bring it. Oh, got it. This is not one of the woods that's listed for making digging sticks, but it's hazel. So I have a hazel digging stick for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, the way that there is a field of social forestry, an academic field. It's in India and Nepal and Africa. And it has to do with village people who have watersheds, forested watersheds, and the government comes in and clear cuts their watershed because it's the commons and they don't have deeds to this land. So there's a field that makes sure this doesn't happen so that the villages keep their water supply. Oh, that's somebody else. They keep their water supply. They continue to have access to the multiple products that come out of the forest. And those academic papers, which you can look up online, are real heavy on industrial economic opportunities. The way that they compromise with the empire to protect villages is to turn the villages into commodity producers. So that kind of like grosses me out. And it's difficult, but I can see it's important. It's an important transition, right? So a lot of what we're thinking about here in permaculture right now is retrofit. We're just like cheating, quick fixes and retrofit. But ultimate permaculture always needs to be kept in mind so that you don't compromise the potential, right? You want to do the short short run stuff. But you don't want to, hey, hi Ken, how you doing?
I
Yay!
just came in from Santa Cruz.
You did, just for this? Oh, oh. Okay. I got some friendly backup here. So I'm so interested in us all learning that we as humans have as many differences from each other as trees have from each other. If we can discover that we as humans are a forest that walks, coming into relationship with a forest that stands, and understand the poetry of that, and sing the songs, both of ourselves, of our own stories, of our social stories, and of the tree stories, then we come into relationship with forests. And then we give back and we receive. So we receive amazing abundance that we can't even handle. It's overwhelming. And we receive a sense of becoming fully human because we feel useful and we feel engaged and there's things we can do, and we discover that we're all different and we all have skills that are helpful, that'll work with each other. So this is some of the social stuff that I'm doing that's pretty challenging, because I see that there's all these different layers of human behavior and human potential that we need to discover, that we haven't celebrated enough. So I'm as we're all learning now about gender. I mean, we're just starting to learn about genders. But there's massive numbers of genders, and that's not sexuality, and that's not physiology. So there's genetic differences that are gender-based, there's social differences that are gender-based, and there's sexual differences that are gender-based. So we've just begun to talk about this. We haven't even gotten very far. And then there's all of us having learning abilities, special abilities that we all have that have to do with eyesight and hearing and muscle coordination and minds, different types of minds. And basically, wonderfully, there's so much that needs to be done in processing materials that all humans who can do anything are useful and can be given things that help them feel useful and involved. So there's a great deal that we have to learn, and a lot of that is discovered by elders watching the children. The elders watch the children and they go, oh, that child, and luckily I can tell you these things because that happened for me, right? I was raised in a traditional society, and they saw that I was queer and weird, and they went, oh, we have a job for you. And you can see what happened. So, I mean, I understood quite early that I was going to have an interesting life. And then I went to public school. And when I arrived in kindergarten, I went to play with the girls, right? And the girls said, no, you're a boy, go away. And then I went, all right, guess I gotta play with the boys. So I went to play with the boys, and the boys said, no, you're a girl, go away. So I became a nature nerd to all of your benefit. Yeah. The trees didn't give me any shit, you know? So, it was cool, it worked out. But I couldn't have pulled that off if I didn't have culture. So one of the problems we have is that we're all hyper-individualistic, not by tendency, but by indoctrination. We got sold a bill of goods. You know, we got talked into being competitive, hyper-individualistic consumers. Well, there's alternatives, which is coming into relationship. And coming into relationship and building culture. Culture is what saves us, because it's culture that holds knowledge, not individuals. I mean, wonderfully, the Quakers worked this out. The Quakers are very clear. Oh, so you had an insight, huh? Well, you better bring it to committee, because, you know, we need to check this out with spirit, because you're just one person. And you just got one message of spirit, but we need to test that to find truth. So to find truth takes community. None of us by ourselves have truth unless we hold it together in place and in culture. So this is a big challenge, right? Not only do we have the culture of trees and of ecosystems to learn to deal with, we have this culture of learning to deal with each other as humans. Because we have this work to do, or we're going to burn down. Or is it burn up? Or is it burn over? Or is it burn through? I get confused.
Burn
you know?
out.
Or is it burn out? Yeah. You know? I mean, the answer to that question is all of the above, in case. Okay, so let me tell you a little story, okay? So here's a piece of land, and we as a semi-itinerant hoop culture people, with our tools, our baskets, are moving to a next elevation camp. And ahead of us go the rangers. Now, part of the intersexual physiological syndrome that I was born with is I have a woman's torso. I have a very small torso. And look at my arms and legs. Okay? So my job, what I got drafted into, is called the ranger. I'm a ranger. I cover ground. And because I don't have hormones, I mean, part of intersexual is you ain't got them. You know, you don't have wrong hormones. You don't have any. So I don't. What are you all bothered about? I don't even understand what you're doing out there. You know? See you later. I'm taking a walk. So the rangers go through first, and they look it over, and they find stuff. All right, and they go, oh, and then they report back. And since rangers are often in-betweens, two-spirit people make great rangers. They can report to Women's Council, and they can report to Men's Council, and they're welcome in both. So they're able to do this bridging work. They're able to do this communication work, both from the trees, you know, which they have their relationship with. My relationship is with nature. And then they bring that to the human culture. So they bridge in many different directions, cross-gender, cross-species. So they're moving. Sometimes they don't fit in well. So we need to hold the rangers in the light. We need to be kind to them. They don't want to be hyper individualistic, but they do need to take a walk. So behind the rangers come back, and they first report, in my story for you, they first report to the Herb Roots and Seed Guild. Okay, so the Herb Roots and Seed Guild, and my guild structures are gender focused, but not gender exclusive. All right? Because, of course, like I said, this is complicated. And many of us here don't even know who we are yet. You know, we're still discovering who we are. So you may have a propensity or an interest in herb, seeds, and guilds, but generally that guild is a women-centered guild. Because the women have the horticulture, the storage, the processing of materials, the planning ahead, warehousing. So all of that, food gathering and food processing, and watching out for everyone, and keeping the children close by when they're very young, is all part of herb gathering and roots and barks and seeds and mushrooms. So they come through after the rangers goes to them first and says, hey, this is cool, and that's cool, check these places out. So then that guild goes out, and it does what I call, and I'm going to take an industrial term, high grading. Okay? But I'm going to take that term back. All right? We're going to take it back for ourselves. So the herb roots people, they come through, and they are picking a little of this and a little of that, and they're gathering some seeds, but they're not changing the structure of the forest. They're grabbing things that might be hurt by the processes that the other guilds are going to do behind them. Right? So the next guild that comes through is the bodgers. So there's an old English word, the bodgers. And nowadays we say, oh, did you bodge that up? Right? No. So what bodgers do is they're looking for the art pieces, the special pieces, the special pieces of wood, the special pieces of the special limbs, the special, and they're going to take them back and make them into furniture and make them into musical instruments and make them into, they do the wood turning. That's what bodgers do. They turn wood. Okay, they make furniture. And they do a lot of other stuff. They make handles and tools. And so part of what the bodgers are doing is they're looking to do pruning, which means lifting the ladders. So fuel ladders need to be broken before you can bring the fire in, because you want to keep the fire on the ground. You don't want the fire to climb. So we're sitting in a fuel ladder here. And if we were to want to burn through this grove, this wasn't here, we'd have to high prune these trees so that the fire moving quickly past them wouldn't hurt them and wouldn't climb up. So the bodgers are pruning. And they make a cut, and they might decide this piece of wood isn't that good, and they would drop it on the ground. But the bodgers also might find a piece of wood that's real special, and they would prop it up in a tree. So the bodgers are leaving a message. They're going, this piece of wood is available to anybody else. We have marked this piece of wood. This piece of wood we're stashing. Okay? So those are the bodgers. So the bodgers go through and they do high grading again. They're looking for the good stuff, the burls, anything that helps get ready for burning, anything that prepares the area and reduces the fuel load. Okay? So then the bodgers, now let me get this right. Okay. Yeah. So the bodgers have gone through and they have just done kind of a picky job. They haven't done a heavy duty job. The next people who come through are the sawyers. And the sawyers are a men's centered guild, but not exclusive. And they tend to be strong because they're falling trees, they're thinning. They're making selections. And earlier today, I mentioned legacy trees. So, very important for us right now as ecotopians, trying to restore landscapes that used to be burned before, is recognizing which really old hardwood trees are the legacy trees that are older than colonization. These are trees that existed before colonization and extraction. And those legacy trees are super important to hold on your landscape. And they have already been there through fire. And sometimes you can see they went through catastrophic fire and so they're burnt out and hollow in the middle. And sometimes they've got those burls and you can see that. And sometimes they have fire scars and you can see that. To keep your legacy trees means that you open up the south so that they get light for photosynthesis. But you can still keep growing poles in the shade on the north side in the northern hemisphere. So that's where you grow Douglas fir poles and harvest them when they're small. So the sawyers are going through and they're looking for poles, they're looking for bigger logs that they're taking out in front of legacy trees to hold those legacy trees, and they're removing bigger ladders, bigger fuel ladders, by taking down whole trees, by taking down small trees, so that the fire doesn't go up into the crowd. The sawyers are also in charge of trails, and they're also in charge of fire control. So they're looking at this whole landscape and they're thinking, how can I move logs out of here on trails that are also fire breaks? And these trails are laid out on key line patterns so that all the material can be taken out on wheelbarrows, or what are called hand arches, the blue ox, the hand arch, which is a two-wheeled device that you can carry. I can move by myself a 16-foot log that's 16 inches around, one person, using a hand arch. Okay? So they have special tools, and they're laying out this trail system which is going to be permanent on your land, on your parcel. You're laying out a trail system that moves frost, that moves water, that holds fire, that allows you to move materials in two directions, not too steep uphill, not too steep downhill. All my trails on my soil are at 1 in 50, 1 foot of drop in 50 foot of run. And that's the biggest keyline ratio you'll see. That's pretty steep for keyline. Okay, but it works great in forestry on soils that leak a lot and that are rough. And so I lay everything out on 1 in 50. And I also look for, on our mountainous landscape on the west coast, and I've run this by Darren Doherty, we have what's called fragmented keyline. We do not have continuous keyline landscape. And that's because of geological uplift. And it's because of sliding. All our key points have been slumped. They've been buried under landslides. It's very difficult for us to find our key points. But we can find the benches on the ridges. So instead of looking for key points in your forestry work, you want to find these benches on ridges. Those benches are super important to social forestry because that's where your charcoal kills are going to go. And that's where your wood processing is going to go. And that's where your bodger camp is going to be. You're going to be building sheds there. You're going to be caching materials there. You're going to be dealing stuff. And you may need a chopper landing pad for emergency removal in the transition times. But you want to find those pads on the ridges. And then you want to build wing trails, they're called, on both sides of the ridge that are the 1 in 50 uphill down to your ridge path. So now you have a fragmented key line that's like this piece on this ridge and that piece on that ridge. And that allows you to move tremendous amount of materials to the ridge pads, to the charcoal kilns. So the sawyers have done some log collecting, they've done some pole collecting, and in the woods, they have taken all the small branches off. So the next concept that's really important to understand is, where are the nutrient sinks in our forestry work? And they are in the tips, the small branches, the twigs, and the bark, not the wood. Wood itself is pure sugar. It's cellulose. It's a sugar polymer. So if you can leave the bark, the twigs, the leaves, and the small branches in the woods, you're not taking that many micronutrients off of the landscape. You're keeping them there for the fungi to break down and for the fire to break down and recycle those micronutrients. Really important to understand. And this is from Jean Pain, and it's called Ramial Tissues Nutrition. Ramial, R-A-M-I-A-L, Ramial Tissues. And that's where your micronutrients are concentrated. And it's real important to get those micronutrients in ground contact. So the sawyers are doing lop and scatter. They're like cutting things down enough to get them really close to the ground so that they're not ladder fuels. Yes?
So if you're going to strip your poles of the bark, you do it right there in the forest?
You should, but usually you don't. You're stripping at those ridge pads because the bark is also very useful in the gray water systems. You know, you can actually run the bark through a number of uses and then put the bark back in the wood. So you could grow mushrooms on the bark. You could like help fix those nutrients on the bark. So you do want to, but the bark is like more valuable, as it were. Now, in transition times, we would have this thing called a drum shredder, but it's hard to get them in North America. You don't want to use chipped wood. Chipped wood, chippers are not that great. I don't want to explain that all right now, but there's another thing to do, which is a drum shredder, which creates spaghetti instead of chopped up wood. Okay, and that we need to work on that. There's another thing you can do though, which is browse feed through goats and other animals that eat. So they'll do your shredding for you and keep the nutrients on site. So you could do what's called cut and feed forage. So there's a number of different opportunities, but the important point is to understand what your nutrient load is and where you're sticking your nutrients and to hold that, all right? So where was I in this story, okay? The Sawyers have gone through, and they're super competent. The Sawyers and the Rangers talk to each other a lot because the Rangers have got advice for the Sawyers about laying out the whole landscape scale operation so that you understand your whole piece of property and you're putting this network together that's going to be permanent. You're putting in a permanent trail system. And notice I'm not saying roads. I'm saying trails. I'm saying wheelbarrows and hand arches, right? So this can all be done. In fact, I'm doing it, all right? So the Sawyers have gone through and they have taken out wood and bark and moved that out of the way, and they aren't stashing much. Not like the Bodgers. The Bodgers are stashing things, right? But the Sawyers are moving stuff out. So the next crew that comes through is the burn pile. Now this is the first phase of the charcolier, charbonneaux, the charcoal makers, okay? And the charcoliers, they're a very special guild, all right? And they're a mixed gender guild. This is very interesting that they are, but you'll see pictures like in Cuba, there's a lot of charcoal that gets made, and it's women who are making the charcoal in Cuba. So that's really fascinating because it's like something that can be done in their backyard from the Sawyers delivering them materials, and then they can still be near the home, and so there's charcoal making. But what we need to do transition-wise before we can do open burning is that we need to do burn piles first. That we just have to because things are too thick. We can't just reintroduce burning that quickly. So burn pile locations are super important because when you do a burn pile, you cook the ground underneath it and nothing's going to grow there for a while. So you want to do small burn piles about this size. This is about the size of a burn pile you want to do. And you don't want to do the burn piles that the industrial extraction people are doing, which are these huge piles that they come back later and burn. You want to do what's called drag and feed. So what you do is you go through the forest. This is the charcoliers. Already the Bodgers have been through, the Sawyers have been through, there's a bunch of material around, and so the charcoliers are looking, okay, I need some dry wood. So they're breaking some dry branches, and they make what's called a hot center start of your burn pile. So you do this first burn, and it's only the inner third of this. Once you get the hot center, once you've got that hot pile, that hot center going, and you've got a pile of coals, at that point you can burn green wood. You can start feeding. You can start drag and feeding and putting green branches and green wood on the hot center of your pile. And you keep turning it in. So you get these breaks, right? You feed. So the charcoliers are dragging. They're dragging all kinds of branches and brush that need to be removed before you can reintroduce open burning. So they're doing a bunch of dragging. They're trying to drag on contours so that they don't move too much soil around and too much duff and litter around. And they're feeding this fire. And then they're turning it in. So you feed, butts out, tips in. You're feeding branch in, butts out, right? So you end up with all these butts sticking out, and you've got this hot center that has burned down. All these butts can be put aside for charcoal making in a kiln, or for firewood, or they can be turned in. They can be just turned in. And you want your digging stick because you want to flip things in, okay? You don't want to get too close. And I don't want to be wearing all this OSHA gear. You know, it's nasty, the materials are nasty. You wear heavy canvas, heavy cotton. You wear wool. watch out. You don't want any plastic. You don't want any plastic or false materials because they'll melt. Fire get on them, you're burned. You've got to burn. You're in trouble. So we need to learn to wear the right clothes, heavy, and watch each other. Again, social, super important. All this social stuff to do this. You're doing hand tools. You're being really careful with each other, but you're burning this and burning this. Well, that takes like half a day to burn a bunch of fuel, and you only can drag from a certain distance. So the dispersion of your burn piles, because you want the minimum number of burn piles per acre, because of how deep they hurt the earth. And then you want a certain drag distance, right? So that kind of defines where your burn piles are. And you're going to use these burn piles more than once, more than likely. So then, this is your first charcoal operation, is what's called quenching. So at the end of the day, you have this huge pile of hot coals, and it's evening, you know. So you bring in salvaged steel drums, old steel drums. You don't need the locking ring anymore, but you need a lid that fits, and you don't want any holes in it. And I call these quenching tubs. All right? Now, a lot of the recipes you're going to be seeing for biochar making have water quenching. They've got a big truck, they've got a big tanker, they've got a hose. I'm on a desert. A lot of us are on deserts. We don't have enough water to be dousing the pile with water. So I have learned to do oxygen quenching. And it's kind of radical, right? You need a really long-handled shovel. And you need a bunch of people because you're only going to get 2 shovel loads and you need a break. Because that's hot. Right? So but it's so fun. You like put that wet handkerchief on your face and you're in there, and you fill up the barrel with hot coals. You just fill that barrel with hot coals and slap the lid on. Tap the lid down. Okay? You have just made 55 gallons of charcoal. Wow. Bang. I mean, quick. Wow. And if you're really, really crazy, and you have the right rack, like a sort of a stretcher, you can carry that barrel to your camp, and it will warm you for the next several hours. You can cook on it, okay? Because it's going to be hot for a while, but you're not going to lose any charcoal because you have cut the oxygen. So that's oxygen quenching as opposed to water quenching. Now that charcoal is normally fairly small. It's not chunky charcoal that you could use in your stove. So I brought my smallest charcoal stove. This is the one I take backpacking. But I often cook in a bigger one, restaurant can stoves. All right? So that's cooking charcoal, and I'll get to that with any luck. And yeah, pass it around. And we're bringing it in this way. Okay. And it's okay. So as I said last night, biochar isn't biochar until it gets charged. That's the important term, charged with life. Because once you've made charcoal, that's pure carbon. And it still has the structure of the wood. So you still have all the porosity. And if you put that charcoal that you've made in your garden soil, it will suck all the nutrients out of the soil, and your plants will turn yellow. And so, I'm in the literature. I'm seeing some confusion here about people not getting this straight about what biochar is. You absolutely need to put this charcoal, which isn't biochar yet, into. You could leave it in the drum and pour BioBrew on it. You could pour diluted urine on it, okay? Or you could take that charcoal and layer it into your compost and put it through a whole compost cycle. And that charges the charcoal. And that's when it becomes biochar. It isn't biochar until it's bio, until it's got life in it. And at that point, biochar is incredible because it holds micronutrients and it holds life during extremes of flooding and drought. I call it a parking lot for microlife. It's just this condominium thing, you know, multi-structure. And it turns out that the soils that benefit the most from biochar treatment, and there's a bunch of different recipes, but ultimately you're looking at tons per acre over time. The ultimate soils are magnesium-heavy clays. Where are we in Ecotopia? We have uplifted ocean bottom. That's very heavy magnesium soils. Magnesium, okay? And those soils benefit the most from biochar. So biochar fits into our ecotopian return of salmon, beaver, and fire. It totally fits in there. And so you're collecting a significant amount of carbon that otherwise would go into the air during a catastrophic or hot fire. Now, let me back up a little bit. I hope this is entertaining. When you do, yeah, give me a little flutter once in a while, will you? Keep me going. Thank you. I got 6 hours last night of sleep, so I'm doing what I can. When you do these dragon feed piles, you can watch your smoke, and you can reduce your pollution. So if you feed right, you've got clear smoke. You're not sending terpenes, Turpines. Now, terpenes are an even heavier greenhouse gas than methane. They're long-chain carbons. It's what you get varnishes from and turpentine, and those terpenes are your brown smoke. Your black smoke are particulates. Your brown smoke is terpenes. Your blue smoke is pure carbon. I'll return to that when I talk about charcoal burn. And your white smoke is water vapor. So you're reading your smoke. You're reading the smoke, and you're trying to avoid brown smoke and black smoke. So if you feed right, you get white smoke. If you get to blue smoke, you're burning up your charcoal. You know, it's time to quench it. So that's how you read it. That's your, what I call, essential scientific instrumentation, eyes. Okay? Watch your smoke. So this dragon feed burn pile is way better for the atmosphere and for sequestering carbon than these giant industrial burn piles that just smoke up the whole neighborhood. So this is like so important to keep all these things in mind. Air pollution, nutrient loads, and carbon sequestration. Yes,
I'm curious about the center burn versus the lighting it from the top and burning
yes,
down.
right. That's water quenching. And that's called a rick, R-I-C-K. Okay, so a rick has to be properly built. You've got to build it with a lot of air. You build up this like cross deck. You build this big pile, and you light it from the top, which is crazy good because watch the smoke. They burn clean. Okay, ricks burn clean, but the rick burns down from the top, and you've got this column of flame like you wouldn't believe, 30 foot in the air if it was this big of a rick. Okay, and as soon as the entire rick is engulfed in flames, you need to hit it with a 2-inch hose. I mean, you need to do a water quench right then.
Right.
So ricks are only really useful closer to your buildings, closer to your farming operations, and with dry wood you season. So you can see I've worked out a whole different gig with oxygen quenching and with dragon feed. So this is important. You're looking at nutrient cycling, you're looking at pollution, you're looking at carbon sequestration. So I estimate on a drag and burn charcoal operation that you're only sequestering about 20 to 30% of the carbon. The rest you're burning off as carbon dioxide and a little bit of terpene. If you could take wood, and this is hard to jump around like this, but if the charcoaliers are doing the kilns, then they're carrying branches of a certain size because you want to sort for charcoal making. You want to sort to size classes. So you want all 2-inch or all 3-inch or all 1-inch. And so you sort. You do a lot of sorting, and that's done on those ridge pads where your charcoal kilns are. And then if you do it in a kiln, and I'll return to this, you can capture 50% of your carbon. You can sequester 50% of your carbon. That's really good. And if all of that carbon goes into your biochar and you're burying it in your ag fields, you're doing really good carbon sequestration, different from carbon farming, which many of you have heard about carbon farming. So I make all of the biochar, all of the charcoal I make that's going into biochar is staying on the ranch. I'm not exporting any of it. There's a really difficult science challenge that we have in social forestry, which is to figure out how much carbon can you export sustainably within the photosynthetic budget. And that's a principle.
Wow.
All right. Do not export more carbon than is fixed per year by photosynthesis.
Yep.
There it is. Good luck figuring that out. And I'll tell you, here on the West Coast, our forests are already carbon neutral. We're not actually photosynthetically adding carbon in a measurable level unless it's a plantation or a redwood forest, unless it's an old growth forest or a plantation. So it's difficult. We're dealing with these already hammered lands. I called it hammered. And hi Alexa. And so our carbon budgeting, boy, we could use some backup. You know, I mean, in transition times, we could use some scientists who will help us out here, because this is difficult stuff to dial in. All right. So all of my charcoal that's going into biochar, I keep on site for carbon sequestration. The only charcoal I export goes to barbecue. Now, when you barbecue with charcoal, it's not sequestering carbon. But oh my gosh, I have cured people of briquettes. Briquettes are toxic. You don't want to eat food that's cooked on briquettes. They won't even tell you what's in those briquettes. You don't. There's glue that they put them together. You don't want that shit. All right. You want natural charcoal. And I make oak charcoal, manzanita charcoal, and manzanita charcoal is the killer charcoal. Once people use my manzanita charcoal, they're like, and then I raise my price. No, sorry. So, at a local farm store. So at least it's burned in my watershed, okay?
Yeah.
Because I only produce so much per year. And I'll tell you, I do by kilos. You know, I'm trying to get us to be world citizens. Let's talk metric here. So I sell a 2-kilo bag of natural charcoal for $15 this year. I was selling it for $10 as a introductory price, but now I've jacked it up, and that's twice as much as you pay for briquettes, something like that. Okay.
Is that just ground ball? Manzanita you use?
Well, no, I'm going to get to that. Well, yeah, I'm close to that. But thanks for that, because I was missing that. Yeah. But I want to finish up. The fanciest charcoal that I make is Japanese tea ceremony charcoal. It's made from white oak, and it turns out that Homeland Security law blocked the importation of Japanese charcoal, and that was lobbying that was done by the briquette industry, right? Those. Okay, never mind. Let's keep it clean here. And so I'm the only person who's making acceptable Japanese tea ceremony charcoal, and I'm doing in a double retort kiln. It's fancy. I mean, only 10% of the oak charcoal that I make is of a high enough quality for Japanese charcoal. But one shoebox of Japanese charcoal, and there's 12 different grades that I need to make. I get $50 for one shoebox of charcoal. But again, a lot of what I do in social forestry is science-based product development. I'm not that good at marketing. I'm not, and every time I have talked to marketers, they always say, you need one product. You need to pay your workers minimum wage. You need to produce a commodity, and you need to sell it wholesale. And I'm like, no, thank you. So I have developed a whole bunch of social forestry products that are multiple products in small quantities.
Right.
Well, that's for us to use in our households to replace consumerism. That's not for export and commodity markets.
Right.
So it's hard to get advice.
Right.
And I have actually worked professionally in multiple product forestry with the Rogue Institute for Ecology and Economy. And the brokerage and the sorting yards, the middlemen, make it impossible. So forget about commodity production in social forestry. Ain't going to work for you. Okay.
One question on the biochar.
Yes.
Besides charging it, do you also grind it up? And
Oh yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes. And I totally lucked out. Kelpie Wilson. There's a woman charcoalier in Tequilma called Kelpie Wilson. You can look her up online. All right. The way she grinds her charcoal is she pours it out on her driveway and drives her truck back and forth over it. I'm not too happy with that, okay? So I scored. Years ago, I found a Smith & Hawkins compost grinder made by Rotocore. And I'm hoping somebody here can find the Rotocore junkyard. They were made in California. RTOCORP. And they made this hand compost grinder. It has a green hopper on the top. It has a crank about this big, and it's perfect for my biochar bags underneath it. So I'm hand grind. It never worked for compost. And so they quit selling it, right? Because a stick gets in there or a rock gets in there, right? But charcoal, to make to grind it up. So you want ½ inch and smaller is what you're looking for, really, so that it can be charged. It's small enough to charge. But that's not your cooking charcoal. That's your charcoal that's going into biochar. And like I said, the top center dragon feed pile, that air quench, that oxygen quench biochar, the charcoal, that's already pretty small. So you may not need to grind that. Depends on how you make it. But finding the right grinder again, and look, hand powered, cool. I get points for that, right? So, oh my gosh, would I love to find more of these hand grinders? They've got to be here. Somebody's got to have a garage full of them someplace, so I hope someone can find them. And friends of mine have looked on eBay to try to lock them down, so. Yes?
What was the name of the guild that comes after the Rangers? You said like the herb, root, seed?
Sawyers.
No.
Sawyers.
Bodgers.
What about the high graders? You said.
Well, high grading is an actual approach, and everybody's doing high grading. Everybody's looking for the best materials. Right, the skim.
Female guild.
Herbert Gill.
The charcoalier.
Herbert
Oh.
seed.
Okay, let's review.
Great, thank you.
Let's go back to the beginning. All right. Ranger. Okay. Rangers come back, report to council, women's council usually, or guild council. They're reporting to herb seeds and roots. Okay, herb seeds and roots come out. They high grade. They go through. They're taking the fine materials. They're looking for seeds and bark, lichens, stuff that would be used up in the fire. So they high grade or skim. Skimming might be a better term, right? They do that. Then behind herb seeds and guild and roots come the bodgers. So the bodgers are looking for art, right? They're looking for craft materials. So they're doing high pruning. They're still thinking fire. All these guilds are thinking fire. They're all thinking fire. So the Bodgers come through. They do their stuff. Then after the Bodgers come the Sawyers. So the Sawyers are doing thinning. They're taking poles. They're taking timber. They're moving logs. All right. Then after the Sawyers, then the Charcoliers move in. Now I get to your question. Okay. So what we've got here on the West Coast, first of all praises for geological instability. We have more nitrogen-fixing shrubs here in Ecotopia than any other place on the planet. And we export. That's one of the social forestry exports that makes sense, is exporting seeds of nitrogen-fixing shrubs. That makes sense. And in fact, my friends Guy Baldwin and Michael Crowfoot, exported a whole bunch of seeds to North Africa, New Zealand, and Australia from Northern California. This was done in the 90s. So what we have is we have a tremendous growth of brush in the understory. And that stuff we need to take out. And it's an interesting thing because brush fields in natural succession are a nurse crop for a forest to grow up through. All right? That brush is a cover crop. But then the forest grows up through it. At that point, these brush fields that are overtop, that are understory, those brush fields can be removed because they're senescent. They've done their job. They've even stopped fixing nitrogen. So several species of ceanothus and manzanita, which is not a nitrogen fixer. But manzanita requires fire to germinate its seed, and madrone does not. I mean, that was just an example of granularity. I mean, can you imagine how much knowledge I've accumulated in my 70-some-odd years here? And how important it is that I transfer this knowledge into culture? Because like I said at the beginning, knowledge is held in culture. It's not held in hyper-individualistic, pretentious, okay. So, don't get fat-headed, in other words. Share. Give it away. So I'm trying right now. So, I am taking out ceanothus and manzanita in order to restore oak, pine, grasslands. So brushlands, when you look at them, you might think it's brushland. But if you look closer, there's scattered oaks in your brush field. And you maybe didn't see them, okay? And so you want to go in there and take out the brush in order to find the savanna. And that brush load gets converted into charcoal. And you do a lot of sorting because you want to keep your fine branches lop and scatter on the ground. You don't want to necessarily burn it in your burn pile. You want to burn your medium branches, and you want to hold the butts, the trunks of the brush, like manzanita can get this big, ceanothus can get this big, right? You want to keep those trunks to go to your charcoal kilns, or the bodgers, or whatever, okay? So that kind of answers your question. Yeah, you're transitioning an entire ecosystem, and you're actually removing one or two species. And if you pay attention, 10 other species appear when you remove the right two. So you get this actual magnification effect biodiversity-wise. And you might not think that when you go, oh my gosh, you're asking me to do what? And I'm telling you, where I do use a chainsaw is cutting manzanita out. Because, boy, these saws on manzanita, as wonderful as they are, they go so fast. So manzanita, its own trick, but at least manzanita is the awesome wood. And you ought to know, if you try burning manzanita, dried manzanita in your wood stove, you're going to melt your stove.
Oh my God.
it will melt down an iron stove. So that's why I transition it to charcoal.
Jeez.
Okay? Because manzanita wood burns hot, and one of the reasons it burns hot is because it co-evolved with fire in order to germinate its seeds. So it's just doing what it was born to do, right? Which is burn hot. Yes.
Can you just speak to when you were speaking about brush fields and protecting manzanita? Can you describe what a manzanita brush field would look like, just so that in my mind I can like see? Because like
You
when I'm
can't
thinking
walk
about,
through
you
it.
can't walk through it, like a really dense.
It's a wall of brush.
Great.
And I call it a thermal nuclear event waiting to happen. Okay, that's what I call
Wow.
brush field.
And so you would take
That's
all of
gotta be
that
so
out,
hot.
find the oaks,
Yeah.
the oaks,
Yeah.
and then take all that out,
Yeah.
sort the small branches, keep those on the ground, and
Yes.
take the rest and use that for trucking.
Yes. Yes. And some logs could be laid on contour if they can be in ground contact.
Wow.
And that's a little bit of carbon sequestration. And the sawyers lay down some of their logs on contour, just off contour, as long as they're in total ground contact, because those are, you don't build swales in a forest or a savanna. You lay down log swales. You embed logs on steep slopes, and litter and water come right down against that log, and then you're holding salamanders and lizards and mushrooms, and so that's what you do to do water control, is besides the trail system I talked about earlier when some of you went here. Okay, are we getting this story down yet? Yes.
I'm curious about broom as a new visitor here in these landscapes, and yeah, is that worked with just by letting fire come through, or are you working with it in any other ways, or?
So broom leaves a very heavy seed load, and so you remove it and charcoalize it, drag and feed, first time, and you get a flush of germination, and then you burn.
Got it.
And then there's another flush of generation, and then you burn. So it might take a cycle of 3 or 4 burnings to use up the seed load,
Yeah.
but at least you've stopped seed production.
Right.
By taking down the first brush field, you're taking out the flowers, you're taking out the seed production. But then you got a seed load laying on the ground. Then you need to burn, 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 burn. Or browse, browse, browse,
Yeah, yeah,
browse,
yeah.
right? But one of those. Okay, and as you can see, do interrupt me with questions, okay? I usually can get back to it. Yes, okay, I'll start there and come around, yes.
For these legacy trees, say like it's a old growth redwood, but it's been cut down, so it's kind of like coppice, and
Yeah.
you have the fairy ring around it, or you have, you know, second or third generation growth. Am I still managing that like a legacy tree? Does it have the?
No, because it's shade tolerant. So some trees grow in shade and some don't. Right? So legacy trees are ones that need sun. And they're usually hardwoods. Very seldom is a redwood a legacy tree until it gets to be old growth. Right? And at that point you can burn under it. It's old growth. It doesn't have limbs anymore that are close to the ground. Got it? Cool.
Yeah, thank you for the charging biochar comment last night and today, because I have seen that in around the world in places where the soil's already destroyed and people are already having a real hard time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're blowing it.
And so I'm curious about another method that you didn't mention that I haven't tried. I don't know if you have experience with feeding to animals, feeding biochar to your chickens, to your cows, to your sheep.
Yourself.
Through their system, and yourself, yeah, through your system, and it comes out charged, as well as cleaning
you're
your
going
system.
to take a lot of nutrition out of that animal.
Right,
The only time I use charcoal internally is when I'm really, really sick. I've been
right,
poisoned.
right.
And then you're absorbing the acids and the poisons that are in your stomach. Otherwise, no. Not unless it's charged.
Yeah,
You can put biochar through your animals,
Right.
and that makes a difference. But that's just like building up their intestinal flora.
yeah,
And you're changing their intestinal flora by sending charged biochar through. So it's
Yeah.
a whole different gig. I'll get back to you.
brilliant.
Ken.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
Good?
you.
You're good? Okay.
On the same topic, so
I was just curious. I hadn't heard about the later gearing as a charging mechanism.
Yeah.
And that seems so
Yeah.
incredible.
You want to ferment it.
Okay.
Ferment it a little bit. And you want to do it about 10 to 1 to dilute it. But you want it to ferment. In other words, so stinky that you can't stand it anymore, and then pour it on your charcoal.
It's got an
Ferment
alarm
and
clock
then
on it.
dilute. Yeah. First Ken, and then can you help me keep track of hands for a little? Yeah. Ken, there you are.
Say more about the process of charging your biochar.
Well, so when you put it in your compost piles, like I have an organic farm at Wolf Gulch, my Mona Lisa in my design work, so there you're talking about big compost piles as big as this circle itself, and you're turning it with a front bucket, right? So that you can just pour bags of charcoal on it, right? But your home charcoal, you want to put in a layer in your brown, green, layer of nitrogen layers. Then there's a layer of charcoal in there. I put charcoal in my human manure.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can charge it that way, but then you end up with charged human manure charcoal, and that also takes out odors. But it's a little tricky because I also charge my human manure with coprinus, the mushroom
Mushrooms.
shaggy mane.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
So shaggy mane mushroom is how I do human manure.
Wow.
Because again, I don't have water. I'm out there in the
Wow,
in the
yeah.
desert. Okay, where am I? I think I'm here, and then okay, thank you.
If it's okay, I'd just like to make a couple comments on some previous questions.
Yes.
So I have heard
I'm
of
trying to think. I almost know.
fine ground charcoal being used with young poultry animals as potential antimicrobial, rather than using antibiotics, which a lot of people put into the feed of the young poultry. So that's one potential use, but overuse once again will drain them. So there's a balance to be had there. And then
Do you have a reference for that? Where they're doing that?
UMass Amherst. I can't really comment more than that.
That's great.
There's a wealth of knowledge. They're really into it. And then I wanted to bring up, and I'm sure that you've come across this, is the terra preta of the Amazon rainforest. And so I've been teaching primitive ceramics over here, and one of the things that I'm trying to encourage people to do is like make pottery at home for cooking and for fermenting, but I've heard it said the last honorable use of a pot is as a chamber pot. And so in the Amazon they have these deposits 7 feet thick of this black earth that they call terra preta, and what they found is in this otherwise kind of nutrient devoid soil, these thick deposits of what is left of these human civilizations that would use their pottery as a chamber pot, and they would use charcoal as in the layers, and it would get rid of the smell. So they would cook to produce charcoal rather than ash, so they could use charcoal to kill the smell of their own excrement. And then they just throw that in a pile with their food waste, and it would just pile up and pile up and pile up. And eventually, you have this beautiful black soil that they were experimenting, doing side-by-side testing, and finding like between 5 to 20 times yield on annual crops between the local soil and the terra preta that was a result of human activity.
Now, what's interesting is the pottery fragments that are in that. And you're the first person I've heard speak correctly to that, okay? Because other people don't get that straight. And what's very interesting is that low-fired clay has bioelectric properties that are compatible with the biochar. So we're making these biochar soils without the low-fired fragmented ceramics in them, and we're kind of missing something here, and hardly anybody talks about that. So I'm fascinated by that. So what I'm doing is, since my charcoal kills, especially my slot kills, which are slots in the hillside in adobe clay. I collect the fired soil in the bottom of my kiln as I use the kiln over and over again, and I mix that low fired clay adobe into my biochar to try to mimic the ceramic effect. So that's my shortcut of trying to move that forward, because that's important to understand that there's this other thing. And clays, I'm fascinated by clays.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes on and on. But let's move ahead. Do you see how hard it is for me to even finish one story here? I mean, come on, this is going on. I think I had a hand up over there. Okay.
You mentioned lichens, and I'm wondering where lichens fit into this picture here.
Yes. A lot. So first of all, lichens are incredibly, they're very important for habitat on the trees. So there's a whole bunch of overwintering insects and moths and stuff like that. In a storm, the storm knocks the lichens off the tree onto the ground. And then the deer come through and eat all those lichens. You very seldom have any lichens that come into soil decomposition, because they're nitrogen fixers. Most of the lichens, especially the usnea, are lichens, the bluer, greener ones, are nitrogen fixers. So the deer process those lichens, and then they move out their poop for broad-scale remineralization and nitrification. Super important. The deer at the same time are eating truffles, which are the mycorrhizal fungi. So they're eating lichens and truffles, and then they're spreading the poop around on the landscape. So you definitely, that's a permaculture principle, do not block wildlife corridors. So the ranger, back to the story, the ranger is also flagging wildlife trails that are going to be obscured during this forestry operation to make sure that those corridors are left open at the end of the operation, so that the normal passage of animals on that landscape is maintained, that pattern of movement. So there, you asked a simple question, you get a complicated answer. Starhawk, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, two questions. One is, I've been mixing my biochar with finished compost and then planting them together.
Yeah.
Is that okay, or does it need more time?
Yeah, it needs more time. You need, the finished compost is fine, it's full of biological activity still, but you need to have that charcoal sit in it for a while. That's why I recommend BioBrew. I think the fastest way is to take that finished compost, make a BioBrew, and soak your charcoal in the finished compost BioBrew. That's your fastest thing. But I'd still say days, if not a week. I'm just guessing, right? But
Well,
you'd
with
have.
the BioBrew, you're supposed to keep it aerated until you are just about to use it. So
Until you use it?
well, until about 4 hours before you use it, if it's aerobic.
Well, this is where this is what I said. Boy, do we need backup. We need some feedback here. So I could imagine the charcoal being in the aeration.
Yeah.
And I also could imagine that charcoal is so absorbent, you might just be able to soak it overnight and you're there. So I think that there's things we can learn here. Now,
Just to comment on that real quick. Just to comment on that. And the charcoal's also, because it's burned out, has air pockets and water pockets in it.
Yes.
So that's going to go for a little bit.
I also have a comment for this, is that, so the reason you're keeping it aerated is so that the aerobic bacteria doesn't die out, which happens very fast because these bacteria are supposed to live in soil, not water. But I have heard of mixing the BioBrew with the charcoal and then just immediately putting the charcoal into a shady space to just allow it to be, and the oxygen gets in there and the bacteria do their thing. So it absorbs very fast.
And also I experimented a little bit with that, and like you can see that they were like living, and the moment I put biochar on it, it stopped any kind of like reactions to it. So it has to be quick. Something with biochar stops their biology. So aerating it, like it's a good. I started using that.
All right, look at that. Well, so this is all social forestry, but we went off on biochar. But charcoal and carbon sequestration is big. I mean, so everything I'm told about this sequence of guilds and their work is ultimately going towards carbon sequestration and fire, and thus salmon, beaver, okay? So that's all connected here. We got a thread that's going through this, and every one of these guilds, and especially the rangers, are tracking all of this. They're following all of this and going back and reviewing and monitoring and everything else. Now, I think I saw a hand over here, but okay, you're.
Would you please tell a story about beaver partnership in this forestry project?
Yeah. Well, there is a lot. So there's a new book out called Eager, as in Eager Beaver. There's a new book out, Eager. I recommend you read that, okay? But basically, at this point, beavers need to be moved in married pairs. You can't just, I mean, this is complicated. There's social. I mean, talk about social. Beavers are incredibly social. All animals are social. All animals have language. All animals have culture. Trees have language. Trees have culture. We need to like get it together. And wonderfully, we have elders to teach us culture, so the humans can learn culture. So we're not teaching animals, they're teaching us. So let's get that straight. Okay. So I have a reality check. We have 20 minutes and we're over. Okay? And I haven't finished the story, which is fun. All right, this is fun. And we went off on charcoal big time. So let me try to wrap this up sort of quick, and then we can have some final questions. So where was I? Okay. So the charcoaliers have done the first thing on the burn piles, and we still haven't introduced broad-scale burning again, right? We're still getting ready. We're reducing the fuel load to the point when we do our underburning, we don't burn down the ranch, right? We got to get ready. So the charcoaliers are now going to take out the wood that the bodgers dropped on the ground. They're going to take the butts that are sticking out, that have been taken out of the burn pile. They're going to take the trunks of the manzanita and the ceanothus that were too big to put in the burn pile, and they're going to take them to the kilns. So there's two types of kilns, the single retort and the double retort. I'm Dutch, okay? Kill, for me, kill, K-I-L-N, is pronounced kill in my language. And for me it's important, because where I come from, my people have been, my Dutch ancestors have been for 400 years in the upper Hudson Valley. And my ancestors, I know, have been there long because of the Fishkill River that ran through my village. And my mother was a fish. So that Fishkill means they had a Dutch land grant, or the creek wouldn't be named that. So kill, K-I-L-L, also means creek or river. So I'm sorry, but I do the fire water poetry here by calling a kiln a kill. But you'll see that if you look it up, you'll see that's the alternative pronunciation. So good that you helped clarify that. So the single retort kill that I make, that I first made, is, we're talking slopes here. We're talking mountains, all right? And so I do a slot kill on a slope about 1 in 6 to 1 in 10 slope, and I do a downdraft pipe at one end and a chimney at the other, and I put a metal sheet over it with the pipes that hold the metal sheet on top of the metal sheet, not under it. Then I fill the trench with wood, and I do rammed earth sides because of the adobe I have. I fill the trench with wood, put the metal top on, and cover it with dirt. And this is soil that I've used over and over again that doesn't have any organic material in it anymore, and it's in these hoppers, berms on both sides of the kiln. Then I cover it with dirt, and then I light the downdraft tube, and I start watching the chimney smoke. And it takes about 4 hours for a quarter of a cord my kills run quarter to a half a cord of what, so a quarter of a cord is 2 by 2 by 8. All right, a half a cord is 2 by 4 by 8 feet. Right there, I blew it on meters. I'll get to that. It's in my book in meters. So then you watch your smoke, and the first smoke, which takes about 2 hours, is white smoke. You're burning off the water. Through your downdraft fire, you're not actually burning the logs that you've put in the kiln. You're heating those logs, and you're cooking them. You're actually distilling them. Fractional distillation.
Wow.
So at some point, all of a sudden, the smoke starts to get brown. At that point, you're outgassing terpenes inside the kiln, and the whole air inside the kiln starts to burn, and you don't have to feed your downdraft kiln anymore. And I have a stove thermometer, so I'm watching my heat, and you can actually see for the first 2 hours the thermometer doesn't go above 210 degrees boiling of water because you're driving off water. And then all of a sudden it kicks up. It kicks up to 350. At that point you're driving off terpenes. Then the terpenes start to burn. And at that point it kicks up to 600. And then it runs at 600, and then the brown smoke runs out and you get blue smoke. And at the point that you get clear or blue smoke, it's time to shut everything down. So you have to pull this chimney, you have to pull that, you cap those two, you put more dirt on, you look for any smoke escapes, you pat things down, and then you sit down. And then you open it up like a day later. You can't open it up very quick because it'll reignite. All right, and again, I get 40 to 50% carbon capture with a slot kit. Now my double retort is a 55-gallon drum inside of a burn pile. Now I have a burn pit, and I made something called a fire pig. So it's a barrel sitting on a cradle with a snorkel that runs out through the side of the pit, and I'm making turpentine and varnish.
Wow.
By condensing the terpenes instead of driving them out into the air. And the snorkel pipe that runs under my barrel has holes drilled in it. So I'm doing a burn pile around this barrel, and all the charcoal on the outside of the barrel. As soon as that burner ignites, I pull this stuff out and into the quenching tubs. So I'm making charcoal that's going to become biochar, and I'm making fancy market charcoal inside this 55-gallon drum. And I'm making these byproducts, and I'm burning clean. Okay, so that's the double retort. So that's fancy, all right? This is why people come and study with me, because nobody else is doing this shit. All right, so especially all integrated.
Yeah.
Especially putting this all together.
And in context to living on land.
And in my specific place, right? And I'm probably going to burn down, but we'll see. I'm ready. I've had a good life. So so now you've made charcoal. All kinds of products have come out. You might have even successfully coppiced some basket materials by taking out the nitrogen fixers. If you do that right, you can burn past your coppice stools, your basketry stools, and still have them be in production.
Yeah. Because
you're cool burning. So then you get to the burning, and that's where we don't have enough time for me to even get you going. Okay, but burning work, open burning, field burning, underburning, worldwide is women's work.
Yeah.
It's a women's centered guild. Not exclusive, but centered. And I'll keep saying that. And my joke is the boys just might try to have too much fun. So we better leave this to the women. Because they're going to work with each other better and call the shots safely. And the guys have a really important job to do, which is to be standing on the fire lines with their tools ready to help, and then to do mop-up, and to do all kinds of support. So when I send in, when I'm ready to burn, all the guilds, all the same guild sequence happens sort of again, except not all the guilds. So I'm ready to burn now. I send the herbs, seeds, and roots people through again. After having done all this brush clearing, I send them through again. They're looking now for mushrooms, they're looking for roots, they're looking for stuff they couldn't see before all the other guilds had done clearing. So they go through, and then they come back and report. Then the ranger goes through and goes, well, I guess I can report to Women's Council that we're ready to burn. And then Women's Council goes, well, check the weather, maybe next week on, or whatever. And then they talk, they send the runner, the ranger, over to the fire guild, and the fire guild has a whole bunch of prep to do. Then they send a runner to the Sawyer's Guild, and the Sawyer's Guild gets out on the fire lines. Now their job is to, outside of the proposed burn area, remove a whole strip of fine fuels and twist them into torches. I call them fire dollies, like in corn dollies. I like twist these fine fuels, grasses, into these torches, all these fire dollies, and pile up piles of them on the fire lines. And so you have removed fuel above the fire lines, making the fire lines safer. Then the women come in ceremonially. You're dealing with fire here. You're bringing a goddess to this place, and you should be drumming, singing, dressed up for the occasion, carrying the sacred fire from the sacred heart in your, where did it go? Did you get that? In your carrying, in my charcoal stove. So you're bringing out charcoal coals from the hearth fire, and you're bringing it out, and then everyone stands on the fire line, lots of prayers, because everyone needs to be centered. They need to be present. You want to be there. And then the Sawyer's Guild and the Ranger are coordinating each other and checking in, waiting for directions, because now the women are in charge, totally, because this is it. All right? And then the women look it over. And there's a very specific thing that you have to learn, which is the right snap in the grasses when you break them. So there's a moment when you can burn safely, and there's a moment when it's too dry, and there's a moment when it's too wet. So this would be a women's skill. They would know this from their gathering work. They would go, okay, no, we can't burn today. All right, we're ready. We set up. Maybe tomorrow. Right? Or this is it. Is everybody ready? And at that point, everybody's in position. And the ranger is definitely in a place where they can see everybody. Because the ranger's going to be communicating between the guilds. The fire guild's going to be busy, the Sawyer's guild's going to be busy, and the ranger's going to be floating and looking it over. And hopefully there's more than one ranger, ranger's guild, right? Because this is serious work. And you want a whole bunch of people there to do this. Because I'm not talking about backing up with fire trucks. I'm not talking about choppers standing by. I'm talking about us, maybe even naked. I mean, seriously, we do this in tank tops. I mean, long pants and leather boots would be smart, all right? But cool burning happens so fast, it moves through, and you're moving it downhill. You're not burning uphill. So the first thing that happens is the fire guild burns a strip against the uphill fire lines. They burn the strip against the fire lines, and it's about a meter wide strip. And then the fire automatically, if you've got it right, starts to move downhill. And then you use the fire dollies to fill in where it's not burning. And then the fire just sort of gently burns downhill. Now, amazingly, and this is hard for us closer to the coast. The best time to burn is in the middle of the night because cold air is creeping down the slope, and that will carry your fire gently through the fine fuels. But that's really hard for us to do. And then so you really need the conditions where you aren't going to have a wind come up. So you're going to burn as early in the morning as you can and have dry fuel. So this is a term called 1 hour fuels. And it's a technical term. It's used by the firefighters. So what you want is to burn 1 hour after the sun has dried out your fine fuels. That's your clue. All right? That's a clue for you to try to get, so that the Women's Guild, of course, have got this all down. and the Rangers, are you catching? Of course, I'm speaking as a ranger, right? As I'm telling you these things. And I'm here telling stories as a ranger, and thus I'm telling more about rangers than anybody else, because that's my gig. All right. But the ranger needs to know everybody's job. And actually, everybody needs to know everybody else's job. Because at any point, one guild, especially in this case the Women's Guild doing the burning, needs to say, okay, we need you to do this and we need you to do that. And you need to bring everybody in if you've got a situation. And a lot of times, that situation is rescue. It might be lizards. It might be we got a problem. Or there might be an endangered species situation. But hopefully you've got that all set up ahead of time. Then you have mop-up. You have people with water sprayers. And I use just sprayers, right? Like garden sprayers. And you don't want fire to be inside a log. And you don't want fire to be in an old fire scar in the inside of a tree. And you don't want fire persisting. And the most dangerous thing is, and you should almost take a note on this, watch out for pine needle beds under pine trees. Oh my God. You might even want to cut a fire break, a little fire break around a duffy bed. But on the other hand, it'd be really good to burn out those beds. So that's where the Women's Guild are going to say, Sawyers, get down here. We're going to burn out this needle bed. It's going to go deep here. We need you to stir, fluff, turn over, and stay on it. Because this is dangerous. And then you're going to need the ranger or whoever staying up late or staying there the rest of the day monitoring. You're going to have to watch this, okay, because you don't want to flare up.
Why wouldn't you just rake the needles up and put them in one of your kilns?
This is complicated. Oh, well, the needles are fine fuel. They burn, they flash burn. You want to leave them in their fallen state because there's less oxygen in there and the fire is less likely. You only fluff up those needles if the fire goes deep. And then the needles are degrading into fungal hyphae and wet ground. So you're really trying to burn off this top layer of needles. You don't really want, unless you have to, you don't want to disturb this mycelium layer that's down a foot or so. This is tricky. That's why I'm mentioning it. The needle beds under the pines and pine oak burning is your biggest challenge. And hollows and logs. And before you've done broad scale burning, you've moved all logs, all fuel onto contour, because a wick is a piece of fuel that runs up and down slope. And that acts like a candle. All right, so you got to be careful of wicks, ladders, pine needle beds, and then there's one thing I keep trying to get in here that I haven't been able to. None of the Native Americans lived down here in the valleys. They all lived up on the slopes for their winter camps. Above the fog, below the snow, in the sun. They didn't live down here. They called these places valleys of death. It was like awful. The fogs, the mildews, they only traveled through that stuff, okay? And then they never burned ridge lines that were conifer filled. Those are fog brooms.
Yeah.
So, for forest defenders, you're doing the right shit, right? What we need to do is preserve our conifer forests on our mountain ranges. The work I'm talking about is called mid-altitude mixed conifer hardwood forests. And those are the hammered lands. Those are the private lands. Those are the roaded lands. Those are the destroyed lands. And those are the lands that the hippies moved into on McNabb Ranch. Okay, so this is the stuff, all right? And this is the private land. And we need to like coordinate between landowners. Sometimes it's a patchwork of state, federal, county, private logging, you know, and like working this stuff out to do whole landscape, whole drainage basin stuff. That's the stuff. And like, I really want you to understand how important that is